Hello everyone and welcome to episode 6 of my IL2 and DCS Spitfire Mark 9 comparison series. This is the final video of the series, and in this video I want to cover just a few more final aspects rather briefly and then kind of wrap up with my overall thoughts on how these two Spitfire 9s compare. The last few remaining items that I want to cover in this video before we get on to concluding comments are the damage modeling. I want to take a look at some wider gameplay elements, and then finally I'd like to conclude with a comment on price, and then if possible we'll dig a little bit into the subject of value, which is obviously heavily related to price. I'm also aware that there are still a large number of comparisons that could be made between these two aircraft that I have not included in the scope of the 5 previous videos. There's certainly a lot more we could say about maneuvering and aerobatics and that kind of stuff, but it tends to be quite difficult to come up with robust and repeatable tests for very fluid aspects of the flight modeling, and certainly combat is almost impossible to create a repeatable scenario. So I won't be able to do significant testing for those types of things, and therefore they're largely outside of the scope of the series. Onto the subject of damage modeling. IL2 has the superior damage model in terms of both damage response and visualization when compared to DCS. Now, this is a widely held opinion throughout the entire combat sim community, and I do not disagree with it. The differences between these two platforms don't really need extended testing to demonstrate this either, and I could quite happily say that IL2 is hands down far ahead of DCS in this regard. I am aware that within the IL2 player base there are still quibbles and squabbles over how easy or difficult it is to damage certain aircraft with certain types of ammunition. However, this kind of discussion I think tends to be very subjective, and the engineering behind damage modeling is pretty complicated, and it's usually based on best guesses rather than loads of empirical data. And I don't think it's ever going to be possible for a producer or a developer to avoid those kinds of discussions. In any case, quibbles aside, IL2 clearly has a far more interesting and responsive damage model than DCS. I would add 2 caveats to this statement though. The first is that damage modeling tends to relate to the overall platform and is not specific to the aircraft that's the subject of a comparison, or in particular is the subject of this comparison, which is the Spitfire Mark 9. So the concept of damage modeling could arguably be out of scope. However, given the importance of damage modeling to combat simming, I have to at least note this, and I can't just ignore it or overlook it. Secondly, the second point here is that Eagle Dynamics, who produced DCS, have acknowledged the deficiencies in their damage model, and they are apparently, or they have shown work on the development of an entirely new damage model that will first be implemented with the Warbirds aircraft. Now, this development of a new damage model is in fact one of the main reasons why I delayed making this comparison series for at least a year now, and I've been waiting for the improved damage model so that we might at least have some interesting comparisons that we can make between the two sims. However, work on the damage model continues without any solid release dates offered, and it's got to the point where I just wanted to make this series anyway, and I can't be bothered waiting any longer. And if this shows DCS in a poor light in comparison, then so be it. So, gameplay. Now this is pretty complicated, and it's really hard to actually compare the two sims and the two modules when it comes to gameplay, because what's available to you isn't really comparable. IL2 has a pretty active and busy multiplayer community, and on the single player side, there are some pretty interesting dynamic campaigns available to you that ship with the module, with the aircraft when you buy it, and it's other component parts. So there's quite a lot to do in single player as an IL2 Spitfire pilot. There are a number of different maps and time periods available to you, and the number of aircraft and other player types that you're going to come across if you're sticking with a World War II scenario is pretty broad. So I would say there's a lot to do in IL2. That doesn't mean there's not a lot to do also in DCS. The multiplayer community for Warbirds is quite small and is not nearly as busy as IL2 currently. The number of Warbirds aircraft that you're going to face off against in the multiplayer environment and in the single player environment is pretty limited. Of course, one could argue that you could simply go outside of a realistic scenario and put yourself in a server that's got also F-18s and F-86s and Russian jets. But I think it's asking a bit much for us to bring that into the comparison in this case, because we really need to be talking about the Spitfire Mark 9 and a sensible plane set and assets and maps for it to fly in. And by sensible, I mean historically reasonable. One of the aspects that DCS does give you, which is either not available or available only in very limited quantity and quality in IL2, is the mission editor. Now, whilst there aren't so many aircraft to fly against, the mission editor in DCS gives you incredible freedom, and there are so many variables that you can modify within that mission editor in DCS that the number of scenarios you can create for yourself to fly in and for others to fly with you in a multiplayer environment is very, very broad indeed. So as with many things and many comparisons, it really comes down to what you're looking for as a player. And I'm not going to list all the various different consumer and player needs and then try to match them up with which platform I think provides that for you. In the end, I think many people actually own both. They'll perhaps buy their favorite Warbird module in DCS. They will buy a pack of aircraft in IL2. And then over time, they will realize which they prefer based on which one they spend the majority of their time in. This is going to now lead us onto the question of price. So before we get onto price and value, let's conclude gameplay and we'll make the jump across. So price. It sounds like this is a simple thing, but it's not. It's pretty complicated. First of all, let's talk about price in DCS. To buy the Spitfire Mark 9 in DCS at normal price, so this is just the standard price but it's not on sale, is $50 US currently. For that price, you get one Spitfire Mark 9 to fly. You do not have access to any other Warbird modules that are paid modules. And this is where it starts getting a little complicated, because there are elements of the DCS platform which are free. The Caucasus map is free. You get access to a free P-51 Mustang trainer aircraft, and there's also a Russian jet aircraft which you can access for free as well. However, most Warbirds players probably aren't so interested in that. Additional to the aircraft, the map, and those couple of other free aircraft, there is also the mission editor, which is entirely free, and hosting multiplayer sessions in DCS is also free and very easy to do. Anyone can host a multiplayer game in DCS, provided you have the base platform. However, now that we've covered those free elements, let's talk about the other elements which you might want to buy if you want something that feels cohesive and makes sense. The Normandy map, which is the only World War II based map currently, is also going to cost you. It doesn't ship free with the DCS platform. And next to that are all of the World War II ground assets, which you cannot use and you cannot play DCS with those assets included unless you buy them additionally. Further to that are any other Warbirds modules that you might want to fly yourself, which you would have to purchase. So the outlay in DCS, the financial outlay, can be as little as $50 if you're just wanting to fly the Spitfire. However, if you're wanting to place that Spitfire into certain scenarios or have access to other Warbirds aircraft as well as the Spitfire, then the price of the Spitfire will not cover those other activities and those other assets. Okay, that's just price. We'll get onto value shortly. Let's now talk about price with respect to IL2. Pricing structure is quite different, so it can be a little difficult to make sensible comparisons. In IL2, it's not possible just to buy a single aircraft and to have that as your sole or main module. Normally, or the only way to get access to a aircraft to fly in IL2 is to buy a pack of aircraft, and these packs normally also come with other things such as a relevant map, and then receive some single player content as well, and access to multiplayer that is appropriate for the aircraft set and the map you've purchased. Now, the maps and sets that you can currently buy as of July 2019 are Battle of Kuban, Battle of Stalingrad, Battle of Moscow, and the Battle for Borden or of Bodenplatte. Prices vary. Bodenplatte is yet to be released, and at release day, its full price is $80. But the older existing series of campaigns go down to $50, which is the same price as the Spitfire alone in DCS. So, if you wanted access to the Spitfire in IL2, the access price is the same as DCS. It's $50. However, the content that you get in addition to it is far different from DCS. You also get access to a number of other Warbirds aircraft, which you can also fly. Plus you get the map and various ground assets, etc. So the discussion of price is, as expected, inevitably leading to the question of value. Which of these is better value? Now, just looking at the two cold, without having experienced either of them, I wouldn't be able to answer that question for you. What you're paying in each case can be the same, $50, but what you're receiving is not only the same thing but done differently. You are actually receiving entirely different things from these two game producers. So it's very hard then to say which one represents better value. It's going to come down to the consumer deciding what they want the product for. What are you aiming to get when you purchase the Spitfire 9? And if you can answer the question about what it is you're wanting to buy, then you might be able to better make a decision about which of these represents better value. The second part of this analysis is really answered by those players who already have both. And that is to look back on how much time you've spent and how much enjoyment you've got out of each, to try and determine whether you think you've spent far more time in one than the other, or you've enjoyed your time in one more than the other. After all, this is a consumer product and it's an entertainment product. And if one of these two products entertains you more than the other, and you spent the same amount of money on each, then that answers the question about which one represents better value. For me personally, I have a kind of specific interest in flight simming. And for me, I spend far more time in one than the other, because one for me appeals to my wants and it appeals to what entertains me in terms of flight simming. So for me to answer the question of which presents better value, the answer is quite easy. But my answer is really specific to what I demand as a consumer personally. And I don't think this question can be answered objectively. One final comment I would make on the subject of value is a suggestion perhaps for those who have a little bit of money and time to consider actually buying the Spitfire 9 in DCS and getting access to the Spitfire 9 in IL2 and looking at them both. You can get these modules for around $25 to $30 when they come on sale, and sales tend to happen pretty regularly. And if you're anything like me, you will probably get 300 or 400, maybe double, triple that of hours of enjoyment out of these aircraft. And when I think about how expensive other forms of entertainment are, if I compare that to buying a game where I might get 1,000 hours of entertainment for $50, then it starts to look pretty reasonable, even if I buy both. Just throwing that out there from experience for people who are wanting to make value and price decisions. Do all of these comparisons over 5.5 videos now add up to a single concluding statement? Is it possible to answer the question, which of these is better? Now, unfortunately for you, curious cat, that is actually a question I'm not going to answer for you. In my opinion, both IL2 and DCS have produced good quality contemporary examples of the Spitfire Mark 9. But more than that, both sims are fun. And at the end of the day, gaming is about entertainment. Each platform, both IL2 and DCS, has found a way to represent different aspects of this aircraft. And at the same time, where one sim might have excelled in one area, the other sim has been able to provide a superior experience in the other. So for me, the question of which is better should really be a consumer-based question. And the best consumer decisions require you to inform yourself, not only about the product itself, about what the product delivers, but also knowing what you want to get back from the product yourself. And if these two aspects align for you, and if the price is acceptable, then I think you can answer the question for yourself, which is better. So with that cop-out, right at the end of a 6-video series, I'm going to sign off here. I'm going to say goodbye. This also means I can go and actually play some games rather than sitting in front of testing all day long. Thanks everyone for watching. I've enjoyed 95% of the conversation in the comments, and I will see you up there. Happy hunting.